Tonight, you will flip a switch. A room will fill with light. You won't think about it at all. But for almost the entire span of human existence, that switch didn't exist. When the sun went down, the world simply disappeared. No streetlights, no screens, no glow leaking in from a neighbor's window. Just black, total and complete, for nearly half of every single day. And your ancestors lived inside that darkness for over 300,000 years. So what did they do with it? The answer isn't what you'd guess. It reshapes how you think about sleep, about conversation, even about your own mind at 2 in the morning. Let's go back to the beginning. Before fire, your ancestors behaved like every other primate on the savannah. When light faded, they froze in place. They found a ledge, a tree, a hollow, and they stayed there until dawn. Moving in the dark meant becoming dinner. Human eyes are weak at night. Leopards, hyenas, wolves, none of them share that weakness. For most of our evolutionary history, darkness belonged to them, not us. Then came fire. The earliest solid traces of controlled fire come from Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, dated to roughly 1 million years ago. And fire didn't just warm bodies, it rewired an entire species' relationship with time. A single campfire creates a rough 30-foot bubble of safety. Step inside that bubble, and predators keep their distance. Step outside it, and the old rules return immediately. Researchers studying present-day hunter-gatherer communities have even documented this pattern still holding. People who wander from the fire at night remain measurably more likely to encounter predators, even now. But safety was only half of what fire delivered. It also handed humans something they had never possessed: extra hours. Before fire, a usable day ended the moment the sun dropped. That's roughly 12 hours in summer, sometimes closer to 8 in winter. Fire stretched that window by 2, 3, sometimes 4 additional hours. Multiply that across hundreds of thousands of generations, and you get a species reshaped by firelight. In 2014, anthropologist Wiessner published research in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences after spending years recording conversations among the Juhwanzi people of the Kalahari Desert, one of the last communities living anything close to humanity's original rhythm. What she found was striking. During daylight hours, roughly 80% of conversation was practical: where to hunt, which plants were ripe, disputes over resources, logistics. But once night fell and people gathered around the fire, everything shifted. Suddenly, over 80% of conversation turned into story. Tales of distant relatives, myths explaining the shape of the world, jokes that rolled through the whole camp. Wiessner's conclusion was bold. Firelight conversation may be where human culture itself took root. The fire was the first theater, the first classroom, the first place humans learned to imagine things that didn't yet exist. It's arguably where the species you recognize as human actually began. But storytelling wasn't the only thing happening after dark. There was something else, something rediscovered only in the last few decades, and it concerns the way you personally think you're supposed to sleep. You were probably never designed to sleep in one unbroken block. In 2001, historian A. Roger Ekirch published findings from 16 years spent combing through historical archives. He uncovered hundreds of scattered references in prayer books, court documents, medical texts, personal letters, even in Homer, that all pointed toward the same forgotten pattern: first sleep and second sleep. Before artificial lighting spread across the world, people didn't sleep straight through the night. They went to bed shortly after dusk, slept about 4 hours, then woke. They stayed conscious for an hour or two in the middle of the night. Then they drifted back down for a second 4-hour stretch until morning. This wasn't insomnia. This was simply how humans slept for most of recorded history. And that waking window in the middle of the night? People used it. They visited neighbors. They reflected on dreams while the details were still vivid. They wrote. Some medical texts from centuries ago recommended this quiet hour as the ideal time for study and reflection, when the mind was calm and the household was still. For a long time, historians actually mistranslated these references because the idea of split sleep seemed so foreign to modern experience that scholars assumed the phrasing must mean something else. The assumption ran that deep. But eventually, science caught up with what the historical record had been saying all along. In the early 1990s, psychiatrist Thomas Wehr at the National Institute of Mental Health ran an experiment that tested this directly. He placed volunteers in 14 hours of nightly darkness for a full month, roughly matching the natural night length our ancestors experienced before firelight extended the evening. Within weeks, every participant settled into the exact same rhythm. 4 hours of sleep, a stretch of quiet wakefulness, 4 more hours of sleep. Nobody instructed them to do this. Their bodies simply reverted, as though an old program had been sitting dormant, waiting for enough darkness to switch back on. Wehr also measured hormone levels during that middle waking period, and the results were unusual. Participants showed elevated prolactin, the same hormone associated with meditative states. They described the experience as calm, reflective, almost trance-like. This wasn't just a gap between sleep cycles. It appears to have been its own distinct state of consciousness, one that most people today have simply never encountered. So what erased it? Light. Beginning in the 1600s, cities started installing street lamps. Paris moved early under Louis XIV, largely to reduce crime. London soon followed. Then came cheaper candles, then gaslighting in the 1800s, and then, in 1879, Thomas Edison commercialized the electric bulb. Within a single generation, the night that had shaped humans for 300,000 years quietly disappeared. Here's a detail almost nobody mentions. The word curfew comes from the French couvre-feu, literally, cover the fire. In medieval towns, a bell rang each evening, signaling residents to smother their flames. It wasn't purely about safety. Night was supposed to be dark. Night was for sleeping and for staying still. For most of history, being outdoors after dark was treated with suspicion. In many medieval cities, walking around without a lantern after nightfall was against the law. Darkness belonged to danger, superstition, the unknown. People feared it in a way that's hard for you to fully grasp now, because you've never actually lived inside real darkness. And then humanity conquered it. Light flooded every corner of the night, and everyone called it progress. But something quietly vanished in the process. Today, the average person is exposed to artificial light for 7 to 8 hours after sunset. That light, especially the blue wavelengths pouring out of screens, suppresses melatonin, the hormone that governs your sleep cycle. Your brain can't tell the difference between a bulb and the sun. When light hits your retina at 11 at night, your body reads it as daytime. Melatonin gets delayed. Sleep gets fragmented. A rhythm that took millions of years to evolve gets quietly disrupted, night after night, without you noticing. Researchers have found that people who spend just 1 week camping without any artificial light see their melatonin cycles shift by nearly 2 hours, resetting to begin at sunset instead of hours afterward. 1 week. That's all it takes for 300,000 years of programming to start reasserting itself. We didn't simply change our bedtime. We erased an entire state of human consciousness. That quiet, reflective window between first and second sleep, the one Wehr's subjects described as peaceful, almost meditative, has essentially vanished for most people alive today. Now, when you wake at 2 in the morning and can't fall back asleep, you call it insomnia. You treat it as something broken. But what if it isn't broken at all? What if it's your body reaching for a rhythm it still remembers, even after everything that's changed around it? For 300,000 years, your ancestors spent their nights inside a rhythm modern science is only now beginning to understand. They gathered around flames and told stories that eventually built entire civilizations. They slept in 2 halves, with a quiet, wakeful hour resting in between. They lived beneath skies so dark that the Milky Way wasn't something you traveled hours to see. It was simply what the sky looked like. And in that quiet hour between first sleep and second sleep, they lay still in the dark and thought about their lives, their dreams, and the world waiting for them at sunrise. You traded all of that for a light switch, and most people never even realized what disappeared behind it.